The rain fell with a cold, spiteful persistence, turning the packed earth of the training grounds at Fort Grayman into a slick, unforgiving mire. It was a landscape of browns and grays, a place designed to grind down hope and forge soldiers from the resulting grit. For Anya Sharma, it felt less like a crucible and more like a penance. She stood in formation, ramrod straight, the icy water seeping into the collar of her fatigues, a silent, unassuming figure lost in a sea of broad shoulders and thick necks. She was 5'6", with a lean build that the other recruits mistook for frailty. Her silence they mistook for fear. Sergeant Major Croft, a man carved from granite and cynicism, paced before the assembled trainees. His voice was a rasp of gravel and authority, cutting through the drumming of the rain. His eyes, chips of flint, swept across the ranks and invariably lingered on Sharma with a look of profound disappointment, as if her very presence was a clerical error he was forced to endure. "This is it," Croft barked, his gaze finally settling on the 6 men of Alpha Team, the pride of the cycle. They stood at the front, their chests puffed out, a collective monolith of muscle and swagger. Their leader, a man named Reyes, wore a permanent smirk. The final exercise. Reapers scythe 3 days in the Blackwood. "You are the hunters," he then gestured dismissively toward the handful of other trainees, the ones designated Beta and Charlie teams. "They are the hunted. Simple enough for you knuckle-draggers to understand." A low chorus of "Yes, Sergeant Major," rumbled through the formation. Croft's eyes found Sharma again. She was assigned to Beta Team, a pairing of convenience with 2 other recruits, Miller and Vance, who had barely scraped through the physical assessments. "And then we have Sharma." The name was spoken with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. Reyes and his team exchanged amused glances. The whispers had started the day she arrived, quiet at first, then growing bolder. "Deadweight." The word clung to her like the mud on her boots. "Your team's objective," Croft continued, addressing Miller and Vance but looking only at Sharma, "is to survive. Try not to get in the way. Observe how real soldiers operate. Maybe you'll learn something before you wash out." The insult was as sharp and cold as the rain, delivered for public consumption. Sharma's expression did not change. Her dark eyes remained fixed on the sergeant major, her posture unwavering. She had learned long ago that reacting to provocation was a waste of energy. Energy was a finite resource, and she would need all of hers. Reyes chuckled, a low, guttural sound that was just loud enough to be heard. "Don't worry, Sergeant Major. We'll be gentle." His team, a pack of wolves sensing weakness, grinned in unison. One of them, a mountain of a man named Griggs, flexed his massive biceps. "Probably tag her out in the first hour. Put her out of her misery." Croft didn't reprimand them. He offered a tight, cruel smile. "The exercise begins in 30 minutes. Alpha, you get a 15-minute head start to establish your tracking perimeter. The rest of you, try not to trip over your own feet." He turned and strode toward the command tent, his boots squelching in the mud, leaving Sharma to stand in the deluge of rain and contempt. Miller, a lanky kid with nervous eyes, glanced at her. "Just stay behind us, okay? We'll handle the navigation." Vance grunted in agreement, already checking the seals on his waterproof pack. "Yeah, just keep up." Sharma gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't look at the smirking faces of Alpha Team. She didn't look at the retreating back of Sergeant Major Croft. She looked past them all, toward the dark, ominous tree-line of the Blackwood. The forest didn't care about reputations. It didn't care about gender or size or the opinions of arrogant men. It only cared about survival. And in the woods she was home. The whispers called her Deadweight. The forest would soon teach them a different name. The mission briefing was held in a canvas tent that did little to mute the storm's fury. A single generator powered a flickering projector, casting a map of the Blackwood onto a portable screen. The forest was a sprawling, 60,000-acre expanse of dense pine, treacherous ravines, and swamplands that could swallow a man whole. It was a place designed by nature to test the limits of human endurance. Sergeant Major Croft stood before the map, a pointer stick in his hand. Your objective, Alpha, is simple. Hunt and neutralize all opposing force elements. That includes Beta, Charlie, and a small cadre of instructors acting as a high-value target. Each of you is equipped with a Miles vest. A solid laser hit to the torso sensors and you're out. Your weapon emits a loud tone. Your vest lights up like a Christmas tree. You are combat ineffective. You will proceed to the designated extraction point and wait for the exercise to conclude. Am I clear? Reyes nodded, his eyes gleaming with predatory confidence. Crystal Sergeant Major, he and his team were already studying the map, mentally carving it up, planning their sweep. They were the apex predators, and this was their hunting ground. Croft's gaze flicked to the other teams. Beta, Charlie, your job is evasion and, if you're feeling suicidal, counter-ambush. You have 3 days. Survive until the final horn and you pass. Fail, and you'll be seeing me for another 4 weeks of remedial conditioning. The threat hung heavy in the humid air. He then turned his full attention to Sharma, his voice dripping with condescension. Sharma, your role is primarily support. Carry extra water. Keep your comms open. And for God's sake, do not get separated from Miller and Vance. You are a liability in the field, not an asset. Your presence here is a box-ticking exercise by a command that has lost its damn mind. Do not make me regret signing off on your paperwork. The entire Alpha team listened, their smirks widening. It was an official sanctioning of their own prejudice. The highest-ranking NCO in the company had just called her useless in front of everyone. The humiliation was a palpable force, yet Sharma absorbed it like a stone absorbs water. Her face remained a placid mask, her breathing even. She simply processed the information. Support, stick with the team, perceived as a liability. These were tactical data points, not personal insults. You have 5 minutes to do final gear checks, Croft commanded. Then we move. As the teams broke apart, Reyes swaggered over to Sharma's small group. He loomed over her, a head taller and twice as wide. Hey, Deadweight, he began, his voice a low sneer. I'm taking bets with the guys. I've got $50 that says you tap out before sunrise. Griggs thinks you won't even make it past the river. What do you think? Sharma finished cinching a strap on her pack, her movements deliberate and economical. She didn't look up at him. I think you should save your money, she said, her voice quiet but clear, devoid of any emotion. Reyes's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised by the directness. He had expected fear or anger or at least some sign of intimidation. He got none. He recovered quickly, laughing it off. Feisty. I like it. Makes the hunt more interesting, he clapped Griggs on the shoulder. Hear that? She thinks she's got a chance. The rest of Alpha chuckled as they walked away, their laughter swallowed by the sound of the rain on the canvas. Miller looked at her with a mixture of pity and anxiety. Just ignore them. They're all jerks. It's fine, Sharma said, shouldering her pack. It was perfectly balanced, every piece of equipment secured so it made no sound. She moved with a liquid grace that belied the weight she carried. Let's go over the route. The primary infiltration point is too obvious. Alpha will expect us to use it. There's a secondary access trail 3 clicks to the east. It runs along a ridge. Better vantage point, harder to track. Vance and Miller exchanged a look. They had planned on taking the main trail, the easy route. Croft said we should stick to the basics, Vance mumbled, hesitant. The basics will get us caught in the first hour, Sharma stated simply. Alpha is aggressive. They'll collapse on the most likely points of entry. We need to be where they don't expect us to be. There was a certainty in her tone that gave them pause. It wasn't arrogance. It was a calm, logical assessment of the tactical situation. Reluctantly, they nodded. For the first time, they weren't just seeing the small woman Croft had belittled. They were hearing a soldier. As they headed out of the tent and into the gray, weeping world, Sharma took one last look at the map. Her eyes weren't tracing the trails or the rivers. They were memorizing the contour lines, the ravines, the places where a person could disappear. The places a hunter could become the hunted. The Blackwood was a living, breathing entity, and it was angry. The wind howled through the canopy of the ancient pines, tearing at their clothing and driving the rain into their faces like tiny, frozen needles. Within an hour of entering the forest, Beta Team was soaked to the bone, the cold seeping deep into their muscles. Sharma's alternate route was harder going, a steep, muddy incline that left Miller and Vance gasping for breath, their movements clumsy and loud. Sharma, however, moved through the undergrowth with a preternatural quietness. Her feet seemed to find the only solid patches of ground, her body weaving through the grasping branches without a sound. They had been moving for nearly 2 hours when it happened. They were crossing a narrow game trail bordered by a dense wall of ferns. Sharma, who had taken the lead despite her teammates' initial protests, suddenly froze. She held up a single, sharp fist, the universal sign to halt. "What is it?" Vance whispered, his voice ragged. He scanned the trees, seeing nothing but a green, dripping curtain. Sharma didn't answer. Her head was cocked, her eyes narrowed, listening to something beyond the roar of the storm. She slowly sank to one knee, her profile dropping below the ferns. She motioned for them to do the same. Miller complied immediately, but Vance hesitated, annoyed. "It's nothing. Probably just a deer. We need to keep moving." "Get down." Sharma's voice was a low, urgent hiss, stripped of its earlier calm. It was the command of a predator, not a plea. Vance, startled by the intensity, finally dropped to a crouch. And then they heard it. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound, almost lost in the noise of the rain. It was a sound that didn't belong in the natural world. Before Sharma could react further, the world exploded in a cacophony of simulated gunfire. The distinct, high-pitched warble of the Miles training rifles echoed from 3 directions at once. It was a classic L-shaped ambush. An instructor cadre, not Alpha, had set a trap on the secondary trail. They had been anticipated. Miller yelped as his vest lit up, a series of bright red LEDs flashing on his chest, accompanied by a long, continuous tone that signaled his death. He had been tagged from the left flank. "Contact front," Vance shouted, fumbling to raise his rifle. He sprayed a burst of laser fire into the foliage, a panicked, useless gesture. A second later, his own vest blared its death knell. He'd been hit from the right. It was over in less than 5 seconds. 2 men down. The instructors, clad in camouflaged ghillie suits that made them all but invisible, began to emerge from the dense undergrowth. Sharma hadn't fired a shot. The moment the first burst sounded, she hadn't tried to fight back. She had dived sideways, not away from the kill zone, but deeper into it, rolling behind the massive, moss-covered trunk of a fallen oak. It was a counterintuitive move, a move that went against every instinct for self-preservation. But it saved her. The instructor's lines of fire had been focused on the 2 standing targets. Her immediate lateral dive had taken her out of their sight picture. One of the instructors, a seasoned sergeant named Davis, keyed his radio. "High-value targets 2 and 3 are neutralized. Last HVT is unaccounted for. Moving to sweep." Sharma lay flat against the wet earth, the smell of decaying leaves filling her nostrils. Her heart beat a steady, controlled rhythm. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She could hear them moving now, their boots crunching on the wet leaves, methodical and confident. They were sweeping the area, expecting to find her cowering behind a tree. She was alone. Her team was gone. The exercise parameters stated that if a team was eliminated, any surviving member was now a lone operative. She was the sole objective for both the instructor cadre and Alpha Team, the ultimate prey. The crisis had escalated beyond simple evasion. This was now a pure survival scenario. The rain intensified, a torrential downpour that blurred the world into a watercolor of green and brown. The temperature was dropping. Hypothermia would be a threat before nightfall. The instructors were closing in, their voices audible now. "Check that deadfall." She couldn't have gone far. Sharma pressed herself deeper into the mud. She unclipped a small pouch from her belt, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Inside was a compact block of C4 and a detonator, standard issue for demolition objectives, but she had other plans for it. She also drew her knife, its non-reflective blade a sliver of darkness in the gloom. The instructors thought they were hunting a frightened recruit. They were about to learn they had cornered something else entirely. She waited, her breathing slowing until it was almost imperceptible, becoming just another shadow in the dying light of the forest. The hunt had begun in earnest. The instructors swept past her position. One came within 10 feet of the log she was hiding behind, his boots sinking into the mud just inches from her head. He scanned the area, his rifle held at the ready, but his eyes passed right over her. She had used the rain and the deep shadows to her advantage, her camouflage blending perfectly with the wet detritus of the forest floor. He moved on, and the moment he was gone, Sharma was moving too. She didn't run. She flowed backward, a ghost receding into the woods, putting distance between herself and the ambush site without making a single sound. For the next hour, she moved parallel to the main ridge, using the noise of the storm to cover her tracks. She wasn't just evading, she was observing. From a high vantage point, concealed in a thicket of rhododendron, she watched the instructor cadre regroup. There were 4 of them, professionals. They moved with discipline and purpose, a stark contrast to the clumsy progress of her former teammates. But they had a weakness. They were communicating openly on their radios, confident that their encrypted channels were secure. Sharma didn't need to crack their encryption. She just needed to see them use their comms. It told her their positions, their direction of travel, and their intent. Her own radio crackled to life. It was Croft's voice, cold and clinical. Beta 1 and Beta 2 are down. Beta 3, you are now designated Lone Wolf. All hunter elements are now authorized to track your position. Good luck. The transmission ended. The entire forest was now against her. She smiled, a faint, grim curve of her lips. Lone Wolf, it suited her. She knew Alpha Team would be coming. Reyes was aggressive, and the news of her team's elimination would only fuel his hunger. He would push his men hard, trying to claim the prize before the instructors could. They would be fast, but they would be loud. Overconfidence made you sloppy. She found what she was looking for near a small, fast-flowing creek, a narrow game trail that cut through a dense patch of thorny bushes. It was a natural choke point. Anyone moving quickly along the trail would have their visibility and maneuverability severely restricted. She went to work. From her pack, she retrieved a spool of tripwire, thin and strong and nearly invisible in the gloom. She tied it low to the ground, about ankle height, stretching it across the trail. She didn't attach it to a grenade or a flare. That was too obvious. Instead, she ran the wire to a small, dry branch overhead, on which she had carefully balanced a cluster of empty ration cans filled with a few small pebbles. It was a primitive alarm, but it would be effective. It wasn't meant to injure. It was meant to startle, to create a moment of chaos she could exploit. She settled into a hiding place 20 meters from the trap, nestled in the root system of an upturned tree. The position gave her a clear line of sight to the trail but kept her completely concealed. And then she waited. Patience was a weapon, and Sharma was a master of it. She slowed her breathing, her body becoming utterly still. She was no longer a soldier in the forest. She was part of the forest itself. It took nearly 2 hours. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but a thick fog was now rolling in, clinging to the low-lying areas. Then she heard them, the sound of men moving with more speed than stealth. The occasional snap of a twig, a muttered curse, the jangle of equipment not properly secured. It was Alpha Team. Griggs, the massive brawler, was on point. He pushed through the undergrowth like a bulldozer, his arrogance a tangible aura. He entered the choke point, his eyes scanning ahead but not down. His boot snagged the tripwire. The result was instantaneous. The branch overhead shuddered, and the cluster of cans came crashing down, the pebbles inside creating a sharp, metallic rattle that cut through the quiet of the woods. Contact! Griggs bellowed, spinning around and raising his rifle, his training kicking in a second too late. The rest of Alpha Team scrambled for cover, their discipline momentarily shattering. Where? Where is it? Reyes hissed over the comms. In that single, manufactured moment of confusion, Sharma acted. She didn't fire her weapon. She didn't reveal her position. She simply slipped out of her hiding spot and moved away, deeper into the fog, using the noise and panic of Alpha Team as her own personal smokescreen. She had tested them, found them wanting, and vanished before they even knew she was there. From a new position 50 meters away, she watched them sweep the area around the trap, finding nothing but a simple tripwire and a few empty cans. "It's a decoy," Reyes snarled in frustration, kicking at the mud. "She's playing with us." Griggs looked nervously into the fog-shrouded trees. She could be anywhere. The fear was a tiny seed, but it had been planted. The Deadweight was no longer just a target. She was a ghost. Sharma shadowed them for another hour, her presence completely unknown. She learned their formation. Griggs on point, 2 men on the flanks, Reyes and his comm specialist, a man named Chan in the center with a final man, Jax, on rear guard. They were moving more cautiously now, the earlier swagger replaced by a tense alertness. But they were still predictable. Chan, the comms man, was constantly fiddling with his radio, trying to get a clean signal through the dense canopy and fog. He was distracted, his attention divided between his equipment and his surroundings. He was the weak link. Sharma decided to isolate him. She circled wide, getting ahead of their path. She found a deep, narrow ravine carved by centuries of rainfall. A single, rotten log spanned the gap. It was the quickest way across. She knew the overconfident Griggs would cross it without a thought, but the others might be more cautious. She didn't need to trap them all, just one. She concealed herself on the far side of the ravine, hidden in a thicket of ferns just a few feet from where the log met the earth. She waited. As she predicted, Griggs stomped across the log without breaking stride. The 2 flankers followed. Then came Reyes, who paused, scanned the area, and crossed quickly. Chun was next. He was still trying to adjust his frequency, his head down, one hand on his rifle, the other on his radio headset. He was halfway across the log when Sharma made her move. She didn't use her rifle. The flash and sound would give away her position instantly. Instead, she rose from the ferns like a phantom. As Chun stepped off the log, his attention still on his radio, Sharma struck. She moved with a speed and violence that was utterly at odds with her calm demeanor. One hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his cry of surprise. Her other arm snaked around his neck, her forearm pressing hard against his carotid artery. She used his forward momentum, turning with him and dropping her entire body weight, pulling him down and back. It was a perfectly executed blood choke. Chun struggled for a few seconds, his hands clawing uselessly at her arm, his feet kicking at the mud. But there was no escape. Sharma's technique was flawless, her grip like iron. She held the choke for 5 seconds, long enough to induce momentary unconsciousness in a real-world scenario. For the purpose of the exercise, she pressed the muzzle of her training pistol against his Miles vest sensor and pulled the trigger. The vest beeped loudly, a single, definitive note of elimination. Chen's simulated death. Sharma released him, letting his limp body slump to the ground. She was gone before he even hit the mud, melting back into the ferns. Up ahead, Reyes heard the beep over his headset. "Chen? Chun? Report. What was that?" There was no answer. "Jax, fall back. Check on Chen," Reyes ordered, his voice tight with alarm. Jax, the rear guard, doubled back, his rifle raised. He found Chun sitting up in the mud, dazed, his vest blinking red. "What happened?" Jax demanded. Chun shook his head, looking around wildly. I don't know. Something grabbed me from behind. I didn't see anything." Reyes and the others converged on the position. They swept the area, their flashlights cutting uselessly through the thick fog. They found nothing. No footprints other than their own and Chen's. No broken branches. Nothing. It was as if the forest itself had reached out and taken their comms expert. The seed of fear began to sprout. They were being hunted. not by instructors but by the one person they had dismissed as irrelevant. The Deadweight was systematically dismantling them. Reyes stared into the oppressive gray gloom, his knuckles white on the grip of his rifle. His frustration was curdling into a cold, unfamiliar dread. 2 down, 4 to go. The psychological toll on Alpha Team was becoming evident. They had lost their comm specialist, severing their primary link to Croft and Command. They were now operating in a bubble of fog and fear. Their movements became slow and clumsy. They bunched together for security, a fatal tactical error. They were no longer hunters. They were herded prey. Sharma knew this. She watched from a ridge above them, a patient predator observing the herd's panic. She needed to separate them again. She used the terrain, her greatest ally. She knew this section of the Blackwood included a series of small, marshy bogs, hidden by the fog and thick undergrowth. She circled around them again, a silent wraith, and found a promising location. A narrow path between 2 rocky outcrops led directly into a patch of ground that looked solid but was, in fact, a deep, muddy sinkhole. She didn't need a complex trap this time. She just needed a distraction. From her pack, she took out a small, battery-powered bird call device, something she'd modified herself. She set it to mimic the sharp, piercing cry of a hawk, a sound that, while not entirely out of place, would be sharp enough to draw attention. She placed the device in a tree about 40 yards past the bog, then retreated to her overwatch position. She waited for 30 minutes until Alpha Team trudged into the area, their nerves frayed. Then she triggered the device. The hawk cry cut through the air. Instinctively, 2 of the men, Jax and a flanker named Corbin, jerked their heads toward the sound, raising their rifles. "What was that?" Corbin whispered. "Could be a signal," Jax replied, his voice tense. "Let's check it out." "Reyes, we're moving to investigate a possible signal. 200 meters? You're 1 o'clock. Reyes, desperate for any kind of lead, grunted his approval. "Griggs, with me. We'll hold here and cover them." It was exactly what Sharma had hoped for. Jax and Corbin moved off the main trail, heading directly toward the sound, their focus entirely on the trees ahead. They moved quickly, eagerly, straight onto the deceptive patch of ground. The earth gave way beneath them with a sickening, wet slurp. Corbin cried out as he sank to his knees in thick, viscous mud. Jax went down a second later, plunging in up to his waist. They struggled, but their frantic movements only served to dig them deeper into the bog's greedy embrace. They were stuck, helpless, their rifles clogged with mud. From her perch on the ridge, Sharma raised her own rifle. The Miles laser was invisible to the naked eye, but through her scope, she could see the small red dot settle on Corbin's chest. She squeezed the trigger. A high-pitched beep echoed through the woods. Corbin's vest lit up. She shifted her aim to Jax, who was now staring in horror at his trapped teammate. The red dot found its mark. Another beep. Jax was out. "Ambush!" Reyes screamed, firing blindly in the direction of the ridge. Griggs joined him, sending a volley of laser pulses into the trees. But they were shooting at a ghost. Sharma was already gone, slipping away behind the ridge while they wasted their energy shooting at shadows. Down in the bog, Jax and Corbin could only watch as their vests blinked their defeat. They had been eliminated without ever seeing their attacker. The team was now down to 2, Reyes and Griggs. The fear in Reyes was now a raging fire. 4 of his men, 4 of the best trainees in the program, taken out. He hadn't even seen the attacker. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. His pride was shattered, replaced by a raw, primal need for revenge. "She's up there," he yelled to Griggs, pointing toward the ridge. "She's toying with us. We're going after her. No more tactics. We run her down." It was a foolish, rage-fueled decision. Griggs, whose own confidence had been sandblasted away, looked uncertain. "Reyes, maybe we should fall back. Regroup?" "Regroup? There's only 2 of us left." Reyes roared, his face a mask of fury. "We are Alpha Team. We don't fall back from some girl. Now move." He charged up the muddy slope, Griggs lumbering behind him. They crashed through the undergrowth, making enough noise for a whole platoon. They were no longer soldiers. They were just angry men, running blindly toward their own destruction. Sharma heard them coming. She had anticipated Reyes's rage, his ego driving him to abandon all tactical sense. She fell back, letting them chase her, leading them on a grueling, circuitous route. She led them through the thickest parts of the forest, over fallen logs and through thorny brambles, draining their energy, fueling their frustration. She was luring them to a place of her own choosing. The place was an old, abandoned Forest Service watchtower, a skeletal wooden structure standing in a small, rocky clearing. The fog was thinner here, the visibility better. She wanted Reyes to see her. She wanted him to think he had finally cornered her. She scrambled up the first few levels of the rickety tower, taking a position on a wooden platform about 20 feet off the ground. She chambered a fresh battery into her rifle and waited. Minutes later, Reyes and Griggs burst into the clearing. They were panting, covered in mud and scratches. They saw her instantly. "There!" Reyes shouted, a triumphant snarl on his lips. Nowhere left to run. Deadweight. They both raised their rifles, but Sharma was ready. She fired first, not at Reyes, but at Griggs. The big man was a larger target, slower to react. Her laser pulse caught him square in the chest. His vest blared, the sound of his defeat echoing in the clearing. He stared down at the blinking red lights in disbelief, then sank to his knees, utterly spent. It was now just Reyes. He stared up at her, his rifle aimed at her position. But he didn't fire. The rules of the exercise stipulated a 5-second delay after a kill before a player could fire again, to prevent revenge kills, but it wasn't just the rules that stayed his hand. It was something in her eyes. The calm, unnerving focus. This wasn't a firefight anymore. This was personal. "Get down here," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Get down here and face me." He threw his rifle to the side. "No more games. No more tech. Just you and me." Sharma looked at him, then at her own rifle. She calmly placed it on the wooden platform beside her. She swung her legs over the side, gripped a support beam, and dropped to the ground with a soft thud, landing in a crouch. She rose slowly, her hands held loosely at her sides. The final confrontation had arrived. Reyes was bigger, stronger, and fueled by a desperate rage. He saw a small woman he could easily overpower. He was about to learn, in the most visceral way possible, just how wrong he was. He charged. He lunged forward, aiming to tackle her, to use his superior mass to crush her against the tower's foundation. It was a straightforward, brute force attack. For Sharma, it was like watching a freight train approach in slow motion. She didn't retreat. She didn't try to meet his force with her own. At the last possible second, she sidestepped. As his body hurtled past, she dropped her center of gravity and drove the heel of her palm into the back of his knee. His leg buckled instantly, his forward momentum now a stumbling, uncontrolled fall. He roared in frustration, twisting as he fell, his arms reaching out to grab her. She wasn't there. She had already moved, flowing around him. As he struggled to get up, she delivered a sharp, precise kick to the radial nerve on his forearm, the one holding his training knife. His fingers went numb, and the rubber blade clattered to the rocky ground. Disarmed, Reyes staggered to his feet, shaking his head, trying to clear the fog of disbelief. He swung a wild, powerful haymaker, a punch that would have knocked a lesser opponent unconscious. Sharma didn't block it. She swayed back, letting the punch whistle past her face, so close she could feel the displacement of air. She used his overextended momentum, grabbing the wrist of his punching arm with one hand and his shoulder with the other. She pivoted, sinking her weight and pulling him forward and down. It was a classic Ippon Sui Nage, a one-arm shoulder throw from judo, executed with a brutal, clinical efficiency. Reyes, for all his size and strength, was suddenly airborne, his feet leaving the ground. He crashed onto his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs with a loud, whooshing gasp. He lay there, stunned, the gray sky spinning above him. Before he could recover, Sharma was on him. She didn't strike him. She simply knelt on his chest, her knee pinning one of his arms, her hands securing the other. She leaned in close, her face inches from his. Her breathing was barely elevated. "Yield," she said, her voice a quiet, final command. Reyes stared up at her, his mind reeling. He saw no anger in her eyes, no triumph, only a calm, absolute control. He had been taken apart piece by piece. His team, his pride, his physical dominance. All of it dismantled by this one silent woman. The deadweight. He was utterly, comprehensively defeated. He closed his eyes, the rain starting to fall on his face again. "Yield," he rasped, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Sharma got off him. She walked over to her rifle, picked it up, and slung it over her shoulder. Then she retrieved his and laid it beside him. The exercise was over. From the tree-line, figures began to emerge. Sergeant Major Croft, the instructor cadre, and the now regathered, dead members of Alpha Team. They had been watching the entire final confrontation on a drone feed. They stood in a silent, stunned arc, the rain washing the mud from their faces, but not the shock from their eyes. Sergeant Major Croft walked into the center of the clearing, his boots crunching on the gravel. His face, usually a mask of hardened cynicism, was unreadable. He looked down at Reyes, still gasping for air on the ground. He looked at Griggs, kneeling in defeat. His eyes swept over the other 4 members of Alpha Team, who stood with their heads bowed, unable to meet his gaze. 6 of his best men, the pride of the company, neutralized in a matter of hours by a single trainee. His gaze finally settled on Sharma. She stood calmly, her posture relaxed but ready, her rifle held at a low, ready position. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even looking at him. She was scanning the tree-line, her training overriding everything else, her senses still attuned to any potential threat. Croft's jaw worked silently for a moment. He raised the datapad in his hand, its screen glowing in the dim light. He had been reviewing her file for the last 10 minutes, ever since she'd taken down Jax and Corbin at the bog. The file was sparse, almost insultingly so. Standard entry scores, basic qualifications, nothing remarkable. It was the file of a completely average recruit. But he knew that was impossible. No average recruit could do what she had just done. The efficiency, the tactics, the utter lack of panic. It spoke of years of experience, of muscle memory forged in crucibles far hotter than this training exercise. He tapped the screen, accessing a deeper, security-locked layer of the file. A single line of text appeared under a heavily redacted section labeled Previous Service. It wasn't a unit name or a list of deployments. It was just 2 words. Call sign Kestrel. Croft's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Not personally, but by reputation. Kestrel was a ghost, a whisper in the intelligence community, a name associated with a Tier 1 Special Missions unit so secret that its official designation was known only to a handful of people at the highest levels of command. They were the operators sent to the places that didn't exist on maps, to fight the wars that were never declared. Kestrels were precision hunters, masters of infiltration, surveillance, and, when necessary, silent elimination. They were legends. He looked up from the datapad, seeing Sharma in a completely new light. She wasn't a recruit undergoing training. She was an elite operator being reassessed or cross-trained, or perhaps just hiding in plain sight for reasons he couldn't begin to fathom. The entire Deadweight persona had been a cover. She hadn't been learning from them. She had been evaluating them, and she had found them all wanting. The condescension he had shown her, the public dismissal, the insults. It all came rushing back to him, tasting like bile. He, a sergeant major with 30 years of service, had belittled one of a handful of the most lethal soldiers on the planet. The realization was a physical blow. He slowly walked forward until he was standing directly in front of her. The rain dripped from the brim of his cap. Sharma finally met his gaze, her dark eyes holding his without challenge, without triumph. Just a quiet, unwavering watchfulness. Croft was a man of few words, A man who believed respect was earned through blood, sweat, and action, not given freely. He had seen more action in his life than most, and he knew, with an absolute gut-wrenching certainty, that he was standing in the presence of a true warrior, someone whose path had been far harder than his own. He didn't speak. Words were inadequate. Instead, he did something he hadn't done for a trainee in over a decade. He straightened his back, brought his heels together, and rendered a slow, formal salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was a sign of profound, unadulterated respect from one professional to another. A silent apology and an acknowledgement of her vastly superior skill. Sharma held his gaze for a moment longer, then returned the salute with a crisp, economical motion. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was immense. In that silent exchange, the entire power dynamic of Fort Greyman shifted. The members of Alpha Team watched, their mouths agape. Their sergeant major, a man who treated generals with barely concealed disdain, had just saluted the recruit they had mocked and tormented. Reyes, who had finally pushed himself to his feet, saw the gesture and felt a wave of shame so profound it almost buckled his knees again. He had challenged a lion, believing it to be a lamb. The silence in the clearing was absolute, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain. The mockery was dead, replaced by a new, chilling understanding. They weren't in the presence of Deadweight. They were in the presence of greatness, and they had been too blind and arrogant to see it. The barracks that night were a study in silence. The usual post-exercise bravado, the loud recounting of near misses and imagined victories, was absent. The air was heavy with the day's revelations. Alpha Team occupied their corner of the room, their movements subdued, their voices kept to hushed murmurs. They didn't look toward Sharma's bunk, but they were all acutely aware of her, a quiet center of gravity around which the entire room now orbited. The derision was gone, replaced by a wide berth of respectful distance. It was a separation born not of exclusion, but of awe. They didn't know the details of her past, but they had seen what she could do. They had felt it. That was enough. Sharma sat on the edge of her cot, seemingly oblivious to the change in atmosphere. A small cleaning kit was laid out on a piece of cloth beside her. With methodical, practiced movements, she was disassembling her rifle. Each part was removed with an expert touch, wiped clean of the day's mud and moisture, and oiled with a light, precise film. Her hands moved with an intimate familiarity, a conversation between a craftsman and her favorite tool. Click, wipe, oil, replace. The simple, repetitive actions were a form of meditation, a way of resetting her mind, of washing away the tensions of the exercise. The metallic clicks were the only sounds in her corner of the room. She was entirely focused on the task, her concentration absolute. This ritual was her sanctuary. It was the one constant in a life of chaos and violence. No matter the mission, no matter the location, the rifle always needed to be cleaned. It was a grounding reality. A pair of boots stopped near her footlocker. Sharma didn't look up, but her hands paused their work for a fraction of a second. She registered the identity of the newcomer by the specific wear pattern on his soles. It was Elias, a quiet trainee from Charlie Team, a man who had watched the initial mockery without participating, his expression always neutral. He didn't say a word. He simply bent down and placed a steaming ceramic mug on the corner of her footlocker. The rich, dark aroma of fresh, strong coffee cut through the barrack smell of wet canvas and old sweat. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of solidarity and respect, then turned and walked back to his own bunk without waiting for an acknowledgement. Sharma watched him go, her eyes lingering on his retreating back for a moment. Then her gaze dropped to the mug. Steam rose from its surface in a delicate, swirling dance. It was a small gesture, but in the silent, rigid world of soldiers, it was a profound one. It was an offering, an acceptance. She didn't pick up the coffee. Not yet. She turned her attention back to her rifle. She picked up the bolt carrier group, her fingers tracing its smooth, cold lines. She worked the bolt back and forth, feeling the precise, satisfying mechanics of the action. The rain continued to streak down the grimy windowpane beside her bunk, blurring the lights of the base into a soft, hazy glow. The world outside was loud and complicated, full of arrogant men and cynical sergeants. But in here, in the quiet solitude of her ritual, there was only the clean, uncomplicated certainty of the task at hand. The rifle, the coffee, the falling rain. It was enough. She was a ghost, a kestrel, a lone wolf. And for the first time in a long time, she was not entirely alone.